So I'd like to talk about scientific posters, and specifically one called the better poster format. And there's someone named Mike Morrison who came up with this design. And in that design, so the links are at the bottom, and they're well worth walking through the videos that he gives, because his essential point is that the scientific poster has maintained this kind of same structure for like 50 years. And essentially it's the wall of text. You have the big title, and then you have these columns, and you have these pre-specified sort of areas. And that this is ineffective from a cognitive science point of view. We've learned something from having the internet and learning about user experience that we can improve on this. And the videos are great in terms of going through and talking about how a scientific poster session works, why this particular format doesn't work, what it comes down to, and then making concrete suggestions for improving. And so essentially the main idea here is that during a poster session, you're wandering around a whole bunch of different posters, and people are trying to give you their idea, but you only end up getting the main point from only a couple. You don't really only get a few pieces of information, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that as you approach a poster, you have to walk right up to it. You have to be very close to even get anything useful, and that the title, although it might talk about the topic, doesn't really tell you much about what they're doing or what the result is, and then in order to figure out anything, you really need to go up and talk to the person who's standing there, or if it happens to be during one of those times where the person is not there, you have to read a fair amount, and there's a limited time for this. And so what it really comes down to is cognitive load. And so the Mike Morrison's videos do a great job of showing what the science is behind this, how we collect information, how we actually process it, and why the standard format just does not work. So he then proposes what is called the better poster format, and this is this screenshot from an interview he did, and this is what he calls kind of the original version, and it solves many of the problems, and then he goes on to make certain suggestions that some I agree with and some I disagree with. So I want to explore these. So the main thing is essentially putting your main finding right in the middle, something that's prominent, some kind of single color or something that would like stand out, and with possibly white space. He goes on to talk about decorative images, and so we'll talk a little bit about that afterward. But the idea is that you have like the main point there, and that we also has kind of two side columns, which the one side which he calls the introvert bar, which is essentially a summary of everything you've done. It's obviously shortened because it's not taking up as much space, but someone who doesn't want to talk to the person standing there can essentially read and get the whole story. On the other side, what he calls the ammo bar was essentially some of the extra points and tables and kind of bullet points, which is why you call it the ammo bar. And so then he then talks about different other formats for this. In addition to this, so we have the a QR code that goes to the actual paper for the conference. So this is the structure, and this helps in terms of if you're browsing, you can get the main point as you're walking through. If everyone had this kind of format, it'd be very easy to figure out which ones you want to go and get more information about later. And then for the things that you only are curious about superficially or just a little bit, you can get the main point going through. And then it also stands out, and it's better than the kind of wall of text that you get. If you want the wall of text, you can go scan the QR code, and then you're done. So he said that the original had some pushback. So he said about 80% loved it, 20% really didn't like it, and one of the main reasons was that the 60 like 2/3 of your space is kind of not used, right, in this way. And although one could argue that it's being used, but it's in a way to make it kind of stand out, to make the message stand out. So he came up with a few other designs. This one's called, I said, what he calls the presenter, and where again it's fairly similar. There's still a main point that you have mostly figures, and that you're kind of not as much text, and really no introvert part at all, and then QR code and so on, and then also downplaying the kind of the author list, because he says, like he said in the interview, that you're wearing a name tag, you kind of know who you are, and so on. You don't need to do that. And then he says, so you can even go even more minimalist with something like this, and this is, he talks about this as a really great kind of data visualization, and he was really excited about this one because it was on cars and jeans and like other things. I mean, it had kind of the image itself was memorable. This was my least favorite one, and when you present at an actual conference, this just doesn't cut it, and this might be great for a billboard. It's kind of an advertisement in some ways, but it just does not work for that. And I want to go through kind of why I think the better poster format is a major improvement, why I think it is, and essentially based on all the evidence that he says. But why going more minimal doesn't work, and this comes from a poster I actually presented at a conference and followed, at least roughly, the guidelines for the better poster format, although this is far busier than the better poster format. I think it's important to understand kind of how I see the philosophy of this format, and then that helps guide, I find, the structure of it. So I still have what you would consider in introvert bar, which is essentially the main text bullet points for all of the different things, a few figures, obviously some equations and so on. And then, but it also has like the main message. It has some decorative images, not a lot, and they are directly relevant to this particular project. And it turns out that in this particular project, we're looking at treatments for lazy eye, of which glasses, the eye patch, and VR treatment are three comparisons that we actually do. You can see them in the titles here. And again, I think this. There are some improvements I would want to make on this one as well, but this is the guideline. So first of all, in order to make room for the actual results, I did reduce the size of the middle, and I don't think that is a problem. In this case, this is a 3x4 poster. This is plenty large enough. The images that I have here are directly relevant to the project. They help inform. So when I was talking and describing the work, I would actually point to the architecture. I'd point to the pieces in this diagram that I made, and so like the main message comes through. I also have the title, because the title is what goes through, and you can look it up in the conference proceedings. And so, and they wouldn't generally, or you wouldn't have had at the time that you submit the abstract for the conference, you might not have settled on the main message yet, and so you wouldn't have had this. So we have to have that, and people will find your poster most of the time. If they're going from the proceedings, they'll find it through the title and kind of the location in the room. So they'll be looking for that in particular. So you need to have that just from a practical point of view in a real conference. If it's not a conference, if it's just a kind of a presentation, local presentation of some kind, you might be able to get away with not having that. But in a scientific conference, you would definitely want to have that, along with the names of all the authors, not all of them who are going to be there, and where their affiliations are. And this is also important for that. I do have a QR code for finding extra information, and there what I use, I point this one to, it could go to anything really, but I point it to a GitHub repository that has all the computer code used to generate all the figures. And it also has a copy of the poster, and it has some animations that might be useful as well. So let me talk about the philosophy of the poster format and why I disagree with Mike Morrison, why this one is actually bad. And I would actually say that this one is also bad for the same reason. So what's the point of the poster, right? You're trying to convey an idea or multiple ideas of some work that you've done. Most people are not interested in your conclusion. They're interested in your methods. That is actually the primary driver for looking at a poster, is to figure out how they got what they want, right? You get interested in the topic. What are they looking at from the title, from the main message? But then if you're interested in it all beyond that, you're interested in the methods. And so that's what has to come front and center. And that's why you can't get away with just images for the most part. You need to have some things more. The other thing, and the other reality, is that while it's true that you are usually standing with your poster when you're presenting, the posters usually go up early in the morning and they're up until late at night. And you have like a 2 or 3 hour time window within that time period when you're actually presenting. The rest of the time, people are browsing and they're going through and looking at the different posters and trying to plan, I want to go and see when this person's presenting, right? So they're doing that, and so the poster has to have enough information on it to be relevant to the person without them having to click on a QR code and go to all the details. So it has to have enough of the meat of what they're actually doing, how they're making the comparisons, the actual measurements, and so on. You have to have graphs that have the scale on them. If you look at the temperature graphic here, this could have been an insignificant increase, right? And this could have been, something from random noise. This could have been something else. You have no sense of scale. You have no sense of methods. You have no idea how they measured it. You can't assess the bias. You don't know whether, how they handle anything. Is there smoothing? Is there not smoothing? All the things that would make this data relevant is missing in this. And sure, you can go the extra step of clicking on the QR code to get to that, but it seems to me that that's less efficient. The same thing happens in this one, right? We have the main message, we have some of the major steps possibly, but we really need to have the actual methods of some degree. Now, it's good that there are that the titles are very small, that they're short rather, and that you don't have a lot of figures. That I think is fine, and I could probably have done a little bit more in reducing it somewhat, but we want to be able to look at it. You also have to imagine that some people will want to talk to you. And I had some people talk to me for like 10, 15 minutes. If you're giving a 15-minute talk, you're talking usually at least 7 to 10 slides, which would be about the kind of the number of image elements that's on this poster. So that's kind of how you can kind of target these things. So the main philosophy I see of the better poster format can be summarized in the following way: that the better poster format presents information on many different scales. So, and I would say 3 main scales. You have the really big scale of here's the big takeaway, right? We have the detailed scale essentially of the introvert bar, and then we have the kind of middling scale essentially of the main graphics that highlight what you're doing. So this side is mostly figures, and then these. I could have made these, and when I was talking, I was pointing these. I was reading off some of the questions came up, and then I did point to a few of these things when people asked about different directions and so on. One of the main things that's really good about this format is that you can read it from a distance. So the fact that you can stand at least 2 posters away and still read this poster, and you can read, obviously you can read this, but you can this bottom part you can also read by quite a distance. The only part you can't read from a distance is the part down here and the part down here. So that really helps when people are really introverts and they don't even want to walk up to you. Sure, they just want to stand back and see that, possibly listening in to the conversation, but being able to follow it and to see some of the main points. And so that's really helpful. Being able to see it from distance is the thing. So information on multiple scales, lots of images that are labeled, and then have things being able to be visible from a distance. Those are kind of the main things that I think make this better. If you go too minimal, you lose the methods, you lose the ability to have a real discussion about of any depth. Because essentially, once you have something like this, someone comes up to you, asks you a question about your methods, you had to pull up whatever else is there. And yes, you can talk about it, but now what are you doing? You have it on like a little screen that they're showing on your laptop. I did actually do that once for an animation that I wanted to show someone, but I wouldn't want to do that for the main part of the poster. Okay, so Mike Morrison said he got some pushback. His direction, I think, went a little bit too minimalist, and he also talked a lot about having like entertaining sort of images and backgrounds and so on. And there, I also find that I get that sense of wasted space. That I feel like every image should have a purpose, not just be decorative and kind of vaguely about your topic. It should have something very directly about your topic and informative, if possible. So I had a very small part in this one, where this was basically entertaining, but the graphics were specifically chosen for this particular project. This part of it was actually informative because it talked about like what was I actually doing and how was I structuring it, but it did it in terms of a picture. If I were to change this, one of the changes I would make is this middle message. And this is one of those things where kind of like 2020 hindsight, that something saying like such and such can help us understand is kind of a weak sort of comment. All right. And it is true that one of the points I was trying to make was that we can use these models to explore a lot of different scenarios, right? A better one would have been, given that like this main message is also reiterated a little bit here, like models allow us to spin out many scenarios that would be prohibitive to do experimentally. If I were to change it, I would make something a little bit more direct, something like the synaptic plasticity model suggests that binocular therapies are as effective as monocular therapies, something that kind of makes a statement about a result, and that's something that I wanted to do. Okay, so there were some other templates. So Mike Morrison posted, you should go see the video, and I'll post the links below. I also post a link to his templates, which are all very interesting. He also talks about having kind of relevant background images and so on, and then some other designs. And most of these designs kind of are in shape. So this is actually really, I think, a pretty good design for the most part. And it satisfies my kind of criteria, essentially having the main message. You have things on multiple scales. I don't know this particular experiment or whether how much of it, how much more detail would be really necessary, but that's the idea. But then you have like, the images going here. This background image, I think, could or could not, I mean, it looks like it may be relevant. And the question you could ask is, if you were explaining to someone, would you ever point to your background and point out a property of the background in order to explain what you're doing, right? So if this happened to be one of the images that they were looking at, and then they actually point at like, oh, notice this blob here, or they notice this like cluster here, or something like that, in the explanation, as part of the explanation, then that's a good image. If it's simply just decorative, then you want to keep that, I would say, to a minimum. So that's that sort of thing. So here's an example which was again touted on the template as being a good example. For the most part, I find that there's a little too much text here. I think it could have been certainly reduced, but I don't like this background because I don't see this background as being anything other than eye candy and kind of a waste of the space for that. And I'm sure there could have been something that is similar that would have been actually informative. And again, the question would be, if you're explaining your work, would you ever point to the background image or to whatever images you're putting there in order to help explain the concept? Or is it just simply something that sets the mood or the tone or like just a topic? And that's kind of how I would draw the line in terms of being informative. One of the better, I say, designs kind of principles is this one by Derek Crow, what he calls the butter poster. And again, he was pushing back against a lot of the wasted space and trying to say, like, look, we can do better with this, and essentially, you know, the title doesn't need to be quite so large, but the images, you know, should be informative in order to take advantage of the layout. There should be summaries and things like methods and so on, and the plots, you know, using white space appropriately and so on. And so I like this one as well. Again, it's detail on multiple scales, the clear message that comes out. I talked about how there can be, in a real conference, a difference between the main message and the title, and that's because of the mechanics of how conferences go. So this one might be modified in that sense. But overall, I think this works pretty well. So I've also used this kind of and slightly modified to replace lab write-ups in undergraduate physics labs. And so the idea essentially is you make a mini poster. And so there are some changes that would be made. So you wouldn't be printing these out, or if you were printing them out, you'd print them out on like 11 by 17, so kind of a smaller format, and that will. So that would be the point. But the idea, I look at these electronically. But the idea is essentially having the main finding or observation translated into plain English, emphasizing important words, and also have kind of an iconic picture for the lab demo. This could be a labeled picture of the lab. It could be a picture example which shows main findings. It could be a graph that highlights the main results, whatever it happens to be. Have essentially the introvert bar to the side, going through bulleted points of the methods, why why it matters, so on, the results, and so on. Do the right side where you have pictures describing the entire lab from the beginning to end with only labeled pictures. So they really just get again, information on multiple scales, main message, big pictures, and then some sketch of the methods and the procedure, and a QR code to take you to more detail, usually code or data or those sorts of things. And that's what the students would usually link to their Google Sheets for their data. And that has worked. So here's an example of an example lab write-up that's like this, comparing rolling different balls down ramps at different angles and comparing different models. And so they color coded their text here to match the text on their graph. Nice touch. Bulleted points for kind of results and lab summary. They have a picture for the lab where things are labeled so that how they translate over here, or how they translate in terms of the variables, any kind of pictures and so on. And so this is like an example of using it. And then they had a QR code for the full data set, which is useful to do. And I found this to be really a useful way to structure, kind of basically replace a lab write-up in this way, kind of get them thinking about how do you frame your data, what's the main picture, and so on. And so that's the so in summary, I mean, I love the better poster format. I think it's great. And I think the move to kind of make it more minimalist is not the right move to make. And there's some practical considerations when you're actually presenting at a real conference, but that this format can be used in other contexts, like replacing lab write-ups and other things. And as long as you're thinking about, framing your problem in terms of multiple scales of information, the main point, the major pictures, and then bulleted lists for kind of methods. If you're thinking in terms of in those terms, then it'll help you guide make the poster, and whatever template you end up doing will be fine for that. So thank you very much. Have a nice day.